Maybe it was something in Odessa McAtee's dressing that led her son to a career in cooking.
He loved my dressing, she said, speaking over the phone Thursday from her home in Louisville, Kentucky. Mama, make me some dressing, she recalled his asking all the time.
Her turkey dressing and collard greens were his favorites. My collard greens. I pick them, I wash them, and I make sure that they are good and clean, she said. When I put them in the pot, I put my ham hock and my country ham and some red dry pepper and some regular salt.
And the turkey dressing? My dressing is really a secret recipe.
Taking lessons learned in part from his mother's kitchen, David McAtee went on to become a beloved fixture on the corner of 26th Street and Broadway in the predominantly black West End neighborhood of Louisville. There, his simple takeout restaurant, Yaya's Barbecue, was a rare source of good food in an area with few businesses of any kind.
Mr. McAtee, 53, the youngest of 9 children raised by Odessa and James McAtee, died early Monday morning on that corner. He had been shot once in the chest amid a volley of bullets fired by 2 police officers and 2 National Guard members enforcing the city's curfew on a group of people who were mingling and having a good time.
Federal and state officials are still investigating the shooting. The Louisville Metro Police Department released a video Tuesday that it said shows Mr. McAtee firing a gun at law enforcement officers. An analysis of that video and others by the New York Times suggests that Mr. McAtee fired a shot after officers fired pepper balls toward him and his relatives, almost hitting his niece.
The notion that Mr. McAtee, who adopted the name Yaya after he became a Rastafarian a decade ago, would have fired on police officers is very much at odds with the man his mother and others remember.
He fed them police, I know that for myself. Gave them food, didn't charge them nothing, recalled Ms. McAtee, who sometimes helped out at the restaurant. He fed a whole lot more people. Homeless people. He fed them. Why? That's the way I raised him. To be nice to people. Treat people right.
David James, the president of the Louisville Metro Council, said Mr. McAtee's generosity was well known.
Say a meal cost $10, and someone said, hey, I lost my job. I only have $5. Instead of him saying, give me $5, he would say, you're going to need that $5, and he'd give them the meal, said Mr. James, a 30-year veteran of the Louisville police force and one of Mr. McAtee's customers.
Shannon Drew went to high school in the West End and remembers Mr. McAtee from her student days in the mid-1990s, when he sold barbecue on a neighborhood corner. By the time she saw him again, in 2016, she was the mother of 2 young sons, staying at a Volunteers of America shelter where Mr. McAtee was a chef from 2013 to 2016.
Ms. Drew had endured a run of misfortune. After a knee injury left her unable to work her daycare job, she was fired. Unemployment and medical bills left her behind on rent, and she was evicted on Christmas Eve of 2015.
At the shelter, she saw Mr. McAtee every day as he served food. He encouraged me, she recalled. He would tell me, you're doing the best you can. You're taking care of your sons, don't be ashamed. His words of encouragement were important to her sons as well. While she is white, her sons, Jaden and Darius, are biracial. Mr. McAtee, she said, was an especially good role model for them. Last year, she saw Mr. McAtee for the last time. She was working at the Department of Motor Vehicles and he came in to renew his license. I'm sure with his business, he sees hundreds and hundreds of people, she said. Before I said anything he knew me right away. He asked how my sons were doing. Mr. McAtee's death has been particularly hard for a community that was already protesting the killing of Breonna Taylor, a black emergency medical technician, in her home by white police officers in March. Louisville, according to political and civic leaders, has never fully recovered from government practices that have crippled black economic development and progress in the city for generations. In 1917, in Buchanan v. Worley, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a city law prohibiting the sale of property to African Americans in predominantly white neighborhoods. But since the policy applied only to laws and not private agreements, white residents began to use racially restrictive private covenants to keep black residents from investing or living in neighborhoods that were mostly white. The federal government's urban renewal efforts of the 1950s and 60s further damaged the fabric of black neighborhoods in the name of redevelopment.
As for Mr. McAtee's neighborhood, a concerted effort through city ordinances and policies of redlining, effectively cut the West Louisville neighborhoods off and led to disinvestment and neglect of the West End for many years, said Sherry Bryant Hamilton, a 19-year veteran of the Louisville Metro Council.
As a result of these and other policies, the West End lacked many of the amenities Americans generally associate with urban living.
The West End is a food desert, or food apartheid area, said Hannah Drake, a poet and activist, who said Mr. McAtee's restaurant filled a void. There are not that many places to eat in the West End. Kids could get food from him after school. Now there is a hole in that community.
Yaya's Barbecue had been on the corner for 5 years and in its current building for 3, and Mr. McAtee was in talks to buy the building, said his nephew Marvin McAtee, 46, who cooked with him.
The menu included hamburgers, hot sausage links, hot dogs and ribs, but Mr. McAtee told his nephew that the key to success was the barbecue sauce, which was thick but not too spicy because Mr. McAtee wanted it to appeal to everyone.
You have to have something that nobody else in the area has to make yours different, because everybody is in competition, Marvin McAtee recalled his uncle saying. Really, he had the best sauce and the most respect because he had been out here the longest.
Hundreds of people stood near the restaurant for hours after Mr. McAtee's death, Ms. Drake said. For nearly 14 hours, his body remained there while the police investigated, said Sadiqa Reynolds, a former deputy mayor and current president of the Louisville Urban League.
You know how it is to be in community with people who absolutely adored this man, standing across the street from the place they know his body is, and having police on the other side of the street guarding him, and understanding that it was police who took his life? Ms. Reynolds said. After Mr. McAtee's body was removed and the police left, Ms. Reynolds sensed a need for closure. She called on Pat Matheson, a gospel singer whose a cappella rendition of Amazing Grace at the scene lent a modicum of dignity to the moment. When the police finally cleared the scene, there was cheering, but also rage, Ms. Reynolds said. At that point, she said, there were a million ways this thing could have gone wrong. Something else did go wrong in the neighborhood, early on Tuesday morning. Looters broke into a Kroger supermarket and left with shopping carts full of goods. The store was one of the few places in the area where people could buy fresh food or have prescriptions filled. After they trashed the Kroger, people in the community came out at 4 a.m., of their own volition, and started cleaning it up, said Gerald Neal, a state senator who represents Western Louisville. Ms. McAtee, whose youngest daughter also died this year after battling health problems, said the family had not finalized plans for the future of Yaya's Barbecue. But Marvin McAtee said he would keep operating the business. Hopefully the business will continue on, said Glenn Browder, a cousin of Mr. McAtee's who lives in Santa Ana, California, noting a long line of entrepreneurs in the family, going back to Mr. McAtee's great-uncle, Ben McAtee, a brick mason. David's brother has sons, and they helped out there. It's important to the family, and important to the city as well. Priya Krishna contributed reporting. Follow NYT Food on Twitter and NYT Cooking on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube and Pinterest. Get regular updates from NYT Cooking, with recipe suggestions, cooking tips and shopping advice.